To the United States, where Florida Republican Matt Gaetz has announced he'll file a motion to remove Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House of Representatives. It comes after a dramatic night on Capitol Hill where a cross-party funding deal was struck that's prevented much of the United States government from being shut down. The rare show of bipartisan unity will keep federal bodies open for a further 45 days. President Joe Biden welcomes the development but expressed disappointment that it did not include any funding for Ukraine's war effort. Both houses of Congress approved the bill just before the midnight deadline that would have seen tens of thousands of federal employees placed on furlough and various government services suspended. So let's get more on this and we can head to the United States, and Sean Dilley is waiting to talk to us, our North America correspondent. What's behind this latest development then, Sean?
I mean, my goodness, yesterday was like something out of the House of Cards on Netflix. This building here behind me didn't stop spinning. By lunchtime yesterday, it looked like a deal couldn't be done, but backroom dealings were happening, and that's sort of what's upset various people who now wish to remove Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. He essentially had lent on Democratic support. Bearing in mind he's a Republican himself. He'd lent on Democratic support to get through a bill that would not cut as deep as Republicans wanted to, but at the same time, it wouldn't give Democratic politicians what they wanted, which was funding for Ukraine. Now, it was inevitable that this was going to upset the hardliners who'd already threatened that if he'd relied on Democratic support to get through an earlier version agreed by both parties in the Senate, they'd attempted to remove him from office. One of the main instigators, one of his antagonists, is a gentleman called Matt Gaetz. Let's have a listen to what he said.
Kevin McCarthy's going to get his wish. I don't think the adult in the room would allow America to sit atop a $33 trillion debt facing $2.2 trillion annual deficits. I don't think the adult in the room would allow $8 trillion of this debt to come into refinancing at a higher level without serious spending cuts. And I don't think the adult in the room would lie to House conservatives. And that is exactly what Kevin McCarthy did.
That's Matt Gaetz from Florida, the fly in Kevin McCarthy's ointment. He has very vocally said he's now going to attempt to vacate the Speaker. So let's talk about how that would work. Kevin McCarthy had to appeal to the hard line of his party. He's not exactly considered to be a super moderate within the Republican Party himself in order to get elected. So when he eventually was elected Speaker, he reintroduced an old rule that used to exist in this place here, that any member, Democratic or Republican, could pass a motion to vacate him. Now, what does that mean? Well, if that then hits the floor, what's needed is a simple majority, 218 members to vote him out, which normally, considering it's the narrowest of narrow majorities, 221 to 212, that would be something that Democratic politicians would happily oblige him on. They do not trust Kevin McCarthy, who's unilaterally announced an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden, going back on a previous promise to have a vote before doing that. He's not a very liked man, to be frank. But Democratic politicians know that if they vacate him on the basis that Matt Gaetz and others, including Marjorie Taylor, other hardliners, don't like the fact that they passed a bill yesterday, that they know that he probably will not get to the position of being able to introduce the promised funding bill on Ukraine. So no Kevin McCarthy, potentially no funding bill for Ukraine. It's almost a non-starter for them. And I have to say that Kevin McCarthy's repeated the words that Boris Johnson, the former UK Prime Minister, once said to Guito Harry, his aide. He says of this, "I will survive."
Sean, thank you. Nice House of Cards reference a little earlier. Our North America correspondent, Sean Dilley, there in Washington.